My brother and I have always been intrigued by the unexplainable. Like many, we're fascinated with stories of the supernatural, fringe science, and modern-day mysteries.
Though we've seen no first-hand proof of its existence, our minds remain open to the possibility.
Unsatisfied with the so-called evidence on television and the internet, we are choosing to take matters into our own hands and conduct our own interviews and research.
Now we're on a quest to speak with as many people as we can and hear the stories of these events from those who have lived them.
No Hollywood effects or exaggerations, and no hidden agenda. We invite you to listen and decide what and who you believe.
We are the Brothers Mysterium.
Hello and welcome to the Brothers Mysterium. My name is Tommy. This is the Brothers Mysterium, the #1 rated commercial-free paranormal podcast on the planet. That's right, we're not going to stop mid-story with a cheap product-placed ad and force you to have to fast-forward through it. You don't want to hear that. We don't want you to have to do that. You want to get straight into the paranormal goodness, and that's what we want as well. Although, we also want you to rate and review the show on whatever podcast provider you're using, and mention the Brothers Mysterium to anybody else, any friends you have who might dig what we're putting out there. And what we put out there was a call for a topic, a show idea, and quite a few people said they wanted to hear a show on phantom voices. What the hell is a phantom voice, you ask? I'll tell you. A phantom voice is a voice that someone hears in real time that has no source, meaning someone is alone in a creepy basement. When they hear a whisper in their ear, they hear someone say their name, but there's no television, no radio, and no other person that could have been the source of this voice. And this reminds me a lot of Episode 8, Phantom Smells, one of our most popular episodes, one of my favorite episodes, where at first the topic sounds kind of dumb. I made the joke about phantom smells. What is it? Smelly ghosts. But it actually turned out to be a really great episode with some really good stories. This is kind of a similar vibe. Some of these stories, by the way, are from 3, 4, 5 years ago. Some of them we had them in our database, in our archives, and we were just waiting for a time to bring them out. And this is that time. And as you may have realized, my brother Eric is not here for today's show, but fear not, everything will be fine. And when speaking of phantom voices and supernatural, unexplained, ghostly vocalizations, here are the most common ones reported. Someone calling your name.
Tommy!
A whisper in your ear.
Hello? Hey there.
Kind of like a ghostly ASMR session. Singing. Crying. Laughing. Playing. Screaming or wailing. A lot of times people report hearing children laughing, giggling, and playing, and most people report hearing a woman screaming or wailing. You might be thinking of course, a banshee from Irish mythology. It's a spirit, a woman of the mounds, who heralds the death of a member of one of the prominent Gaelic families by shrieking or wailing. That's kind of the traditional definition. Now, it's basically a death omen. If you hear the shriek of the banshee, you or someone you know is said to be on their way out, as in, they gon' die. There's also reports of spirits, creatures mimicking voices of loved ones, which we will get to that later in the episode. And since we are talking about auditory ghost encounters, while not voices, I'll just mention that some very common sounds associated with a spirit, a ghost, a haunting include footsteps, knocking, scratching, and tapping. One famous example of this type of knocking communication is the famous Fox sisters. For those unaware, they were 3 sisters from New York who played an important role in the growth of spiritualism. The 2 younger sisters claimed they could communicate with ghosts through rapping, not freestyle rapping, though that would have been awesome, but by rapping, we mean more of that knocking sound, which it turned out in the end, after becoming very famous mediums, the 2 younger sisters putting on these performances, the older sister managing them, they kind of imploded, and it came to light that what they were really doing was snapping and cracking their toes, knees, and ankles. So they would say, "Is your spirit here?" You'd hear 2 pops for yes. "Are you angry?" 1 pop for no. So people thought, oh man, these spirits are communicating through these rapping sounds. Turned out they were frauds, but it goes to show that for as long as we have been around, people have been listening and hoping to hear some sort of sound from a ghost. One such person, Thomas Edison, who actually tried to invent a spirit phone of sorts. He called it the spirit box. It's a device used for contacting spirits through the use of radio frequency. These spirit box devices, also known as a ghost box or a Frank's box, are used as an electronic medium for the purpose of direct communication with a spirit. A lot of people still use them. A lot of ghost hunting shows will use them. Also, while we're on this little history tour of phantom voices, in 1969, a Latvian doctor said he'd been conducting experiments in communication with the dead, and he had established contact with Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, and many other deceased 20th century statesmen. The recordings, 72,000 of them, contained their voices. Who was this doctor? Well, his name was Konstantin Raudive, Raudive, and he called his technique electronic voice projection, shortened later to EVP. And again, this was not a true phantom voice. It wasn't a real-time interactive communication. What he would do is he would ask questions while he was recording, the tape was running. He would only hear silence, but upon playback, he would hear these voices. That EVP, electronic voice projection, morphed into the more common EVP, electronic voice phenomena, which is the same exact principle. I'm sure you've seen or heard this. People using their phones, video cameras, tape recorders, anything will go into a place deemed to be haunted or sometimes inadvertently capture audio where they'll ask questions. Basically, when you go back, you watch it back, you listen back, there are voices allegedly that were not there. As you may know, loyal listeners, I'm kind of the bad boy of the paranormal podcasting world. I like to buck trends. They call me the paranormal Luke Perry. They call me the phantom voice Fonzie, the James Dean of the paranormal supernatural scene. And it's not because I have a toothpick hanging out of my mouth most of the time, or a beard, or a leather jacket, or aviator shades, and I'm usually leaning against a Harley Davidson. No, it's because I fear no Ouija board. I think orbs and photos are dust, and I don't get excited or intrigued by them. And I'm very skeptical about EVPs, just because I feel like people hear what they want to hear. Anytime it's on a show, they play it over and over. They have the subtitle on the bottom that says, "Get out." So you just keep hearing, "Get out, get out, get out." I always compare it to song lyrics, misheard song lyrics. There's comedians that do bits about it. There's tons of funny examples where when you listen to a song and you know the real words, it sounds like it. When you listen and it's other words, not the real words, it still fits, it still works. But again, we are not discussing EVPs. We are discussing real life, real time, in the moment, someone hearing a phantom voice. And there are some famous stories of people actually hearing ghosts, hearing these voices in real time. One such example comes from Cheryl Landon, daughter of the famous actor Michael Landon, which was featured in Unsolved Mysteries.
I remember going through so much of the emotions, and I really thought, how could I go on and do these television shows successfully? And I very clearly heard my father during the day say, when you go to do your first show, I'm going to leave you a long stem red rose.
Finally, the day arrived. Cheryl was in New York City, nervously preparing for her first talk show appearance. She says that's when she heard her father's voice again.
I heard his voice again. I mean, he was right there. And this time he told me to find the fountain in Central Park. When I had gone down to the bottom of the stairwell, there at my feet, exactly where I had stopped, was a long stem red rose. This is just the way my father said it would be. It was like I had discovered a treasure of gold. I was so happy. I was so full of encouragement that it was just like a boost of love, a boost of encouragement.
And then there's the well-known story out of Utah about Baby Lily and Spanish Fork police officer Tyler Beddoes, which was featured in numerous media outlets.
and we got a call of a car upside down in the Spanish Fork River. And we got there to the scene and got down into the water. It's cold, cold water, but I didn't feel it at the time. And I get down into the water, and that's when I heard a female voice. All of us heard it, saying, "Help me, help me." And we were able to flip the car onto its side. That's the only way we could get inside the crushed mess. Mom's killed on impact, and then this little child's in that car for 14 hours, barely above water.
Hold on, am I missing something here? You said the mother was killed at impact.
Right.
Okay, so who was saying, "Help me, help me"?
That was such a tough thing. We were the only 4 officers there, all male. And when we heard the help me, we thought someone was in there until we found out that the only adult female had been dead for hours. So for me, I really believe an angel guided us to there. And I really, it's something that's so hard for me to process at first. My faith was really in the dumps. So I really struggled, and I was losing my faith in God. And when I heard this voice and what I believe was an angel that guided me to the car, it's the only explanation. It's really just amped up my sense of, my faith changed. It did a 180. I'll never doubt God again. I mean, He really changed me. We saved baby Lily that day, but in reality, she saved me in my faith.
And we've had several examples of phantom voices pop up as part of other larger experiences in different episodes, such as Gracie from episode 12, School Spirits.
I guess I'll start with the least scary experience I've ever had. Each floor has a laundry room, and I always definitely thought that was the scariest part of my floor. But one time I went into the laundry room and I was doing my laundry, and I was minding my own business, leaning into the washer, really hard to get my stuff all the way up from the back, because they're pretty big washers. And I swear to God, I heard, I don't really know how to describe it. It wasn't like a whisper, but it didn't sound like a wind, but it sounded something in between, someone breathing out like that. And it scared the living crap out of me. So I sat up really fast and I hit my head really hard on the top of the dryer, and it hurt so bad. And I was like, "Oh, and I said that out loud. And I looked around, there was no one in there. And then I swear to God, I heard something say, "Sorry." There was no one in the room, obviously. And you can believe me or you cannot, but I swear, I was so scared. I ran out of there without getting the rest of my clothes, and I got my roommate, and I said, "Please come here. I'm so scared. I still have 5 minutes of stuff to do in here. Will you stay with me?" And they were like, "Yeah." So that was so scary. I swear to God, I heard something say that. I don't know if they felt bad because I hit my head or what, but it was pretty terrifying, honestly.
And Guy had a story from episode 20, Haunted Happenings.
I remember, I was probably about 5 or 6, and my brother's friend had come over, and we would play manhunt in the house. And we had a rule where if you got caught, you had to help that person find the last person. So naturally, when I would find my brother's friend, he wouldn't really help me. So I remember, we were walking around the house, and he opened up the basement door and was like, "Hey, are you down here?" And he heard someone say, "I'm down here." So to try and get me away from there, he told me to check out the garage. So I walked over, I opened up the door, and, there was my brother. And I remember him looking at my brother's friend, and he was just so pissed. He's like, why did you tell him I was here? And the look on his face, he was like, "How did you get here?" And my brother's like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "I heard you say I'm down here when I opened up the basement door." And we were just kind of looking at him like, "What are you talking about?" And soon after that, he got on his bike and just, went home.
Did anybody else hear that, or only the friend heard the voice?
We didn't hear it, but, I can definitely say I believe him 100%. He's not the type of person that would really lie about that. And, we could tell just by the look on his face that he was definitely, shooken up by something. Right. So I remember even after he left, we went down to the basement to see what it could have been. And, there's nothing down there.
The Brothers Mysterium.
Well, as you know, the Brothers Mysterium is never a solo gig. We always need somebody else here to discuss, to bring other points of view, have some healthy debating and conversation and energy. So at this point, I'd like to welcome today's special guest co-host, Guy. Guy, welcome back to the show.
Hey man, really, really appreciate you having me on. Really excited to do this. I'm a big fan and, stoked to do this.
Absolutely. And for those unaware, as you've already heard, Guy did sort of witness a phantom voice in episode 20, Haunted Happenings. He told about his brother's friend hearing that voice in the basement. He was also on episode 6, Sleep Paralysis. So, Guy, just for people who may not know you or what you're about or haven't listened to those episodes yet, are you a believer in the paranormal? Where do you sort of fall on the skepticism scale when it comes to ghosts and the like?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm a believer to a degree. Do I believe it in a sense where, it's kind of like what you see in movies? Definitely not. I do think there is something out there, but I think a lot of times it gets a little over exaggerated and, people kind of scratch their heads when they hear that stuff, But, I would say I'm a believer to a degree.
And then I've been asking the guest co-host as they come on the heavy question. This is sort of a two-parter. Number one, what do you think happens when we die? Is it just blackness? Do our souls go to heaven, go to hell, go somewhere else? And then sort of part two of that is, what do you think ghosts are? What are these spirits?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to answer the first part, I think, when it comes to that time, I think your body kind of goes through, something, whether it be just like the science behind, organs kind of failing and, your body just kind of stopping, So I do think there is, some sort of, reaction, I guess. I've heard your episodes with the near-death experiences and, the white light is common. And, I've heard that there's a reason why you see a white light. So I do think, afterwards it's kind of, see you later.
So like, what is a ghost in your whatever personal philosophy? I mean, it's a tough question to answer, but just sort of at this present moment, what would you define as a ghost? How do you explain what a ghost could be?
Man, yeah, I think it's a tough one. I think a ghost, is more of like a personal experience. I think, for somebody to mourn and to kind of lose somebody, I think there is a psychological connection that I think, registers heavily with that person. I don't think it's, somebody kind of walking around and, moving things, but I do feel that there is some sort of spiritual connection. And yeah, I mean, I think that's the best I can make of it. I wish I had a better answer.
Hey, it's not easy to answer, which is why this show exists and why people listen, because nobody knows, man. It's the ultimate question.
Absolutely.
Let's hop right into it. We have sort of a progression of stories, phantom voice experiences that people have shared on the show. So we'll start with some that are creepy, but a little more maybe easy to debunk. We kind of have some doubt. We can say, well, this could have been that. And as the stories progress, it's going to get harder and harder to sort of explain away what's been happening. So as I had said earlier, some of the most common phantom voices are someone's name being said. So we'll start out with a story from Andrea.
Hi, it's Andrea M., and I live in New York City, and I am 16 years old.
And Andrea has had a few encounters with phantom voices.
So the first story, it happened in middle school, so I was around 11 or 12 years old. And it was a Friday night, and I had fallen asleep on the couch. I woke up really early the next day, around 7, 8 a.m., Everyone else was still asleep since it was a Saturday, so I decided to go back to sleep. And 5 minutes go by, and suddenly it felt as if I heard someone whisper my name. And I thought I might have misheard, or I was just hearing things since it sounded so distant, and I had just woken up, and like maybe I was just wrong. But 2 minutes later, it happened again, but this time it was so clear and loud that I was so sure that I heard my name this time, and it felt like a weird sensation against my ear, like someone was literally near by my ear and just whispered it, and I could feel like their breath on my ear. So I immediately got up and I went to my parents' room and I told them what happened, and my mom was like, maybe it's one of your siblings pulling a prank on you, because I have 3 older siblings and I'm the youngest, so they're always teasing me and pulling pranks on me. So later on, when the rest of my siblings woke up, my mom asked them, like, hey, did you do this to your younger sister? Like, she was really freaked out. They said no, like, we were all sleeping, I wouldn't even wake up that early to pull a prank on her like that, so they clearly didn't do it. So I never really knew what happened with that. And the next story was, it took place more recently, last summer, I think. So this took place in my room, which I share with my older sister. And it was around 5 a.m. and I was just about to go to sleep. I put my phone down, it was on charge, and I was about to go to sleep, and all of a sudden I hear my name whispered, and it was like a loud echo throughout my room instead of it being directly into my ear like it happened last time. And it just sent shivers down my entire body, and it creeped me out so bad. So I don't even know, maybe I was just hearing things since I had stayed up so late and I was tired. I don't know, maybe it was something else and not paranormal.
Andrea may not be the only one in her home who has heard phantom voices.
This happened to my older sister, actually. She told me one time when she was getting ready in our room, she heard like a really loud shush and out of nowhere. And I think my mom has heard a whisper too, but I'm not sure. And, just little things like that.
So Andrea heard some whispers. It was her name. First time she woke up, she said it was really early. She tries to go back to sleep. She was in that weird sort of asleep-awake state. Heard her name twice, at a distance at first, 10 minutes later. She hears it more clearly, more loudly, directly in her ear. She says she could feel the breath on her ear. She goes to her mom, classic mom move, blames the siblings. It's some sort of a prank. One of them is the culprit. The lazy-ass siblings, they're all sleeping in. They're like, we didn't wake up early just to prank you. So that was sort of her first experience. Then a second time, again, early morning, 5 a.m. She says she's asleep. So it's similar to the first time, but this time she heard a loud echo throughout the room, her name, and she admits it might have been because she was tired, half asleep. And final thing, it's interesting to note that her sister possibly heard a shush sound, and her mom, she said she thought it heard some sounds. But what do you make of her 2 experiences hearing her name?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's interesting that a lot of times it's, somebody hearing their own name being called.
Right.
I think a lot of times, given that it was 5 a.m., 6 a.m., you're kind of in that, whatever, phase or stage of sleep. So a lot of times it could kind of be, maybe something they were dreaming about, or, something that they're doing subconsciously, where they just kind of think they hear their name.
Right. Yeah.
So I think, it's interesting that they only say their name. So I think with that, I kind of sprinkle a little bit of, salt on it. But, yeah, I don't know if that's compelling enough for me to be like, wow, I believe you.
Right. I think you pointed out it's that hypnagogic state, which is when a lot of people have those sort of hallucinations. It's the experience of you're in that transitional state from wakefulness to sleep. So your consciousness is sort of, you're on the onset of sleep or just coming out of sleep. You see weird things. That's when you'll jerk awake in response to, you're falling in a dream. Both of her encounters happened, as you said, early morning. She's half asleep. She's tired, which is also when sleep paralysis, which you were on that episode, occurs. A lot of weird things happen. And also, like you said, I'm in the same boat where hearing just one quick word, it's 3 syllables. Andrea is her name, but still, it's so quick. It's so fast. It's a name you hear all day. You're always thinking of it. So it's pretty easy to say that she could have heard either a different sound and interpret it as her name, or she could have been dreaming. The creepy part is when she says she felt like the breath on her ear. That's definitely a little hard to explain, but again, could have been sort of a a hypnagogic sleep hallucination, but creepy nonetheless.
Yeah, and I think the breath, the breathing behind the ear, could have been just kind of circulation around the room. Was it a fan? Was it their AC, or could be a number of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, but I think to kind of what you said before, it's not the most compelling story I've ever heard.
Yeah, definitely. Let's move on to another example of someone hearing their name. This one comes from Matt.
My name is Matt Robinson. I am 18 years old.
Matt lives in Northern Virginia, and this incident took place about a month before Matt recorded this for our show.
I was sitting on my couch in my basement, which directly behind it there is a wall with a sliding glass door and a window. If you're sitting on the couch, the sliding glass door is to your left and the window is to your right. And it was probably about 2 a.m. at the time. It was real dark outside. And so I'm sitting on the couch alone. The window behind me to my right is open. My name is Matt, so I admit it's possible that something natural could create something that sounds similar to my name, because it's not a very complex sound. Matt. It could be Matt. It could be air escaping. It's almost like that. But the only thing that really makes noise outside of that window behind me is the AC unit for the house. And I'm very familiar with the noises that it makes, like it makes ridiculous noises. And it's loud. And it wasn't even on at the time. So it was an AC unit. But as I'm sitting there on the couch, I hear this very clear whisper of my name from behind me. Instantly, the second I heard it, I dismissed it. As soon as I heard it, my brain instantly was like, nope, that's not your name. There's no way somebody's whispering your name through that window behind you. And I know I would have heard footsteps through the leaves and the snow up to my window. If somebody did. But as soon as I had time to dismiss it, it came right back second time. My hair stood right up on end that second time. But I was still quick to dismiss it. I did not want to think that that was really my name being whispered behind me, because it just didn't make any sense. But then again, third time, clear as ever. I slammed the window shut behind me, pulled the blinds on the sliding glass door without looking out at anything, ran into the other room, into my bedroom, woke up my pit bull, bring her into the living room with me, turned the lights on out in the back deck, let her out into the backyard, and just let her investigate. She didn't seem to be unsettled. Here she is now, you can hear her walking around. She didn't seem to be unsettled, and there were no signs of anyone entering my yard or coming anywhere near the window. No footprints in the snow, but nothing. Nothing except noise in my house, out back. None of my electronics create sound similar to that. And it hasn't happened since, and it never happened before. Part of me still wants to kind of draw it off as something completely natural. That it's hard for me to believe that was something paranormal. But the one thing I am sure of is I am glad I did not respond to my name being called. I think that slamming the windows and getting the dog were the correct response to deny off whatever would have been or may have been calling my name.
So again, late at night, he says it's about 2 a.m. He's home alone, chilling in the basement, when he hears from directly behind him, there is a window there. He hears somebody whisper his name, Matt. Super creepily. He hears it directly behind him, very clear, very distinct. He says he was awake, so sort of is like Andrew where it's late at night. Was he nodding off and didn't realize it? Who knows? But he very clearly, distinctly says he definitely heard it. He's like, no, it couldn't be anything. Hears it again. He's still kind of like, no way, nobody's in my backyard. Hears it a third time, even more clearly, and that's when he jumps up, slams the window shut, shuts the blind, runs out the room, grabs his dog, hits the backyard lights on, releases the hounds. The dog goes out. Nothing. Nobody there. No footprints in the leaves or the snow. He said he would have heard somebody coming up to the window. He admits it's not a complex sound, so it could easily be misheard. But again, he's pretty adamant that he knows all the sounds of his air conditioner, of any other thing that would have been outside. He says it never happened before or since. So that's also interesting that it's sort of just a one-off. What do you make of Matt's sort of whisper from the window?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny how a lot of these happen around like 2 a.m. and on, I don't think, spirits or ghosts kind of, function on certain times. So,
Right.
there's always that possibility that, maybe he was just tired or, maybe he was watching something on TV where the background sound in conjunction with, some sounds that he would maybe hear outside could kind of create that Matt-esque sound.
Yeah.
And to hear it 3 times in a row, I think that certainly, makes it a little bit more interesting, but I think, it's just a sound, and if it's, a ghost or a spirit or whatever you want to call it, why are they just calling his name?
Yep.
Like, if he heard it the first time, and if I'm a ghost and he acknowledged it, wouldn't you kind of follow up and say something else? So that's kind of where I'm like, what is the intent? So that's why, like, to hear the same exact thing 3 times, I think you kind of, again, maybe contributed to the environment, really factoring the fact that it was, 2 a.m. and, who knows what was on TV. So, it could be a number of things. But again, I don't know. Little skeptical with that one.
Yeah, and it is even a simpler sound than Andrew's name. Matt is literally 1 syllable. He even said himself, like, it could have been like steam getting released. It could have been the wind. Who knows? And to your point, I always talk about on the show, ghostivation, a word I created, the motivation of a ghost. So I'm glad you bring that up because, if there's a spirit there trying to get his attention and it does it enough that it says his name clearer and clearer and louder, and then when it has it, he runs away, but then comes back with the dog and stuff. That's the perfect time to either, whatever, if it was his grandmother or former resident of the house, that's when you show yourself. That's when you manifest as a voice one more time and say, get out, classic ghost, get out. Or you say, look behind the couch and that's where his will is or something. So I'm glad you brought up, like, what is the purpose of, also with Andrea, it's like, what was, whatever that spirit was trying to do other than, unless it was the ghost was pranking her by trying to wake her up. It's like, what's the logic or the motivation to do that and say somebody's name?
Right. And I mean, so this guy, Matt, said that this was the only time he's experienced this, right?
Yes.
So from like a spirit/ghost perspective, it's like, all right, like I got this guy's attention, right? Is he a family member of mine, or is he somebody who I'm just kind of trapped in these 4 walls and I hear his name, I'm trying to get his attention? What is the intent? You kind of said before, is what am I trying to do? Am I trying to get him to, peel back the wall a little bit here because I have something hidden here that I want him to discover, right?
Right.
So yeah, just kind of fishy for me.
Yeah, so those were 2 kind of classic name whispering. Again, the most common sort of phantom voice experience people have. They're creepy elements in there for sure, but I don't think either of us are too impressed. But there are other times where it's more complicated, harder to chalk up to just a misheard sound, misinterpretation by the listener. And that is the case with Chrissy and her experience.
Oh, yes. Okay. There was one time where I was alone, sitting in the living room. This is, we moved in September. 2 months later, one of my friends had committed suicide. And she was very clairvoyant, and, we went to beauty school together. I knew her since I was like 9 or 10 years old. She had hung herself that month. And it had to have been a month later. When I started beauty school a year prior, she walked into my classroom and she said, Christine. And I looked over and she was behind me. She's like, good luck today. It was my first day. A year later, she died. A month or so, maybe 2 months later, I just started having a meltdown. I was sitting on the couch. The TV was off and I was just staring at it. And I was hearing all these like footsteps up the wall, just things falling, and like just wind going through the living room with no windows open. Just like, it was just like ominous things just happening over and over and over again. And I ended up covering my eyes and asking her to stop and crying, like, just please leave me alone, please leave me alone. And I heard my friend say my name. She's like, Christine, good luck. just like she did the day that I started beauty school. And I knew she was there. And when I later talked to a medium who's related to her, she told me that that's her new project, that Jacqueline later started helping people cross over, and it was determined that she never actually did, that she's just there to kind of guide spirits. And we kind of found that out, and I keep being told that every time I get a reading that Jacqueline's helping people cross. So it was kind of crazy that that's immediately what she did, and I know it was her voice.
And and this was when you were in the Lodi house that was haunted. And did the things that were going on, the ominous events, did they stop at that moment? No.
The rest of the night I was okay.
That's what, I mean, not overall they stopped, but you
that
heard the
night
voice,
I was
and
okay.
then the rest of the night was okay.
I think I actually fell asleep by myself.
Oh, okay.
But which is rare. That's
right,
never happened.
Yeah. So that was Chrissy. That was from episode 22, The Poltergeist. And it's her friend from beauty school. And Chrissy is sort of in the middle of this poltergeist situation, which you can go back and listen to that episode for the full details. But she kind of explained that there's wind inside the house. There's objects flying around. She hears footsteps going up the walls, and it's craziness. And then she hears more than one word, Christine, good luck. And she says it's just like that first day of beauty school, where her friend Jacqueline, who has since passed on, and she believes is now helping other spirits kind of cross over, and she's guiding spirits. But that night, amidst all this chaos, she hears her friend's voice. She recognizes right away it's Jacqueline's voice. She hears her name, Christine, but then she hears good luck, and that phrase has meaning because that's the first thing she said when they both started beauty school first day, or at least when Chrissy started on her first day. And then after that, at least for that evening, all the paranormal, poltergeist, crazy activity stops. She says she actually slept that night. So this one is more interesting just because it's more involved than just a name. Guy, what do you think of this one?
So I think, you definitely want to be respectful and sensitive to these type of stories, right? Because obviously, Chrissy went through a lot, as her friend, and to lose somebody, especially at that young of an age, can definitely play a big part in terms of how you develop as a person, right? But I think also internally, it's a lot to handle for anybody. That being said, it's these type of stories where I hope she heard it, because I think that's, reassuring in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
But it's also interesting that, again, she said, this friend said the same exact thing that she heard, what was it, a year later, right?
Yeah, about.
Could have been something that, triggered for her to think about that line, right? Maybe she didn't really hear it, but she thought she heard it because maybe, there was something that they did that kind of brought up that feeling of, her presence again. But yeah, I mean, I think you got to be sensitive. I don't want to come to any conclusions with this one, but I would just say it's interesting that, from the spirit perspective, if they had that opportunity to comfort their friend or to bring any sort of peace, why say the same thing?
Yeah. And the timing on this one is interesting too, where she's in the midst of this crazy, scary poltergeist scenario where she's living in this terrible apartment and she's not sleeping. And there's a crescendo of wild things happening with the wind and the sounds. And so it's at that moment, it all kind of stopped. Even if her own subconscious produced the voice in a way, it's would that be strong enough to stop everything else from happening? Unless it was all happening in her mind. I guess we could kind of play that game, but she did have a roommate, if you go back and listen to that episode, who was also witnessing all these poltergeist activities. So it is interesting. I mean, I guess maybe the ghostivation in this case would be just wanting to comfort her friend with a saying that she knew was special, that she knew she would remember and had kind of more meaning than if she had said hey, Chrissy, it's okay. The poltergeist will leave you alone tonight. Maybe it was something a little more personal, I would maybe guess.
Yeah, and I think when you think about those, activities, whether it be the wind, a lot of those things that can happen. There's so many different explanations and angles that you can kind of approach it with that can explain some of this stuff, right? But again, sensitive topic. I think it's cool for her to kind of open up and, share that story, because I think for a lot of people, they hear it and, there's a lot of comfort in that. So
definitely. Well, let's keep the voice phantom train rolling with a different type of voice.
My name is Jacob. I am living in Sacramento, California. I'm 25 years old. So this story took place in 1997 in Redding, California, which is about 2 hours north, and would soon become my hometown, I guess, in a way, because we'd move up there. We were driving up to visit my aunt and uncle who had recently rented a place, and the family was getting together for some reason. This was actually my first time visiting. I should probably preface this whole story with the fact that I'm horribly afraid of spiders. And when I say horribly afraid, that I'm like paralyzed, crippling, horrifically afraid of spiders.
So Jacob has an extreme or irrational fear of spiders, also known as arachnophobia. Keep that in mind as we return to the summer of 1997, when an 8-year-old Jacob pulls up to his aunt's house.
We had just arrived to the destination, and I had gotten out of the car. I was driving with my mom, my grandma, and my sister. When I got out, it was nighttime. The only thing that was lit was from the patio light, and I think there was a sensor light on the driveway area, and the car was parked on the curb. I was the first one out of the car. I was walking around the driveway, and the first thing I noticed was these 2 wooden posts sticking out of the grass or the lawn, and they were as tall as a doorway, and they had the same width. And for some random reason, I had this urge to just walk right through them as I was walking to the house. I believe my mom, I don't believe, my mom and my sister, my grandma, were already way ahead of me around the corner because I couldn't see them. So I see the 2 posts, and I hear my mom call me.
Come on, Jacob, let's go.
To come, and as I'm walking straight for them, as I am right in front of them, I hear a voice behind me just say, it was a woman's voice actually, Jacob, stop. Don't walk through those, just go around. And immediately I did stop. It caught me off guard. It wasn't loud, but just very clear, as if someone who's standing right behind you would speak normally, like over your shoulder. So immediately I turned around and there was nobody there. It wasn't my mom's voice, and it wasn't my grandmother's or my sister's. I kind of went around, not off the driveway, but I was just kind of wandering around trying to see who was talking to me. I think initially I thought it was my mom, though, but when I realized that she was way ahead of me and she had already called my name so I could make the differences, I was kind of just wondering who the heck that was. But I couldn't find the source, and eventually turned around. I didn't walk through it. Walked around it and got into the house. Didn't sleep that night because of the voice and the fact that I'd already seen like 3 spiders already walking in when I had already walked into the place.
The next day, Jacob and the fam get up early to go to a water park. As Jacob is leaving the house, he steps outside and
as I go around the corner, I see those 2 wood posts, and in between those wood posts is a huge spider's web that looks like the kind you would see in like a National Geographic magazine or documentary. Just a perfect spider web, just huge. And in between it was this disgusting, monstrous spider, probably the size of my adult hand now. And right underneath it was like a smaller spider, probably its baby or something. Not immediately, but then I just started connecting the voice that I heard, and the spider's web, and I realized that if I had not heard that voice, I would have walked face first into a brown recluse and its baby and its web, which would have wrapped around my face and probably bit me. Turned out there was a huge spider infestation on the property. There were black widows and brown recluses just covering the trees, the bushes, tons of dead ones in the pool, all over the cars. Freaking terrifying. Needless to say, no one was really comfortable staying there. And we ended up getting a hotel that night and never went back.
One final addendum to Jacob's experience.
And while this may question the validity of my story to some skeptics listening, I do have a form of schizophrenia that I live with, and so I have had hallucinations and have, in a way, heard voices, but they're more internal unless it's a really bad episode. But luckily, I'm not really haven't really had an episode like that in a while. But anyway, the point I'm trying to get to is that I'm able to differentiate between when something is supernatural, like a supernatural voice or apparition, and when it is simply my own mind playing tricks on me, or just my own, I guess, condition, if you want to call it, the voices in my head type thing, which I don't hear very often anymore.
So what does Jacob believe he heard?
I'm not a religious person, but I am spiritual. I've always looked at it as maybe just a guardian angel or something looking out for me, because if it hadn't said anything, like I said, I would have went right into that spider's web, and I don't even know. Probably would have died of a heart attack before anything would have killed me, if it would have bit me or anything. I am very thankful for that voice that called out my name and told me not to walk through that.
So, Jacob, I guess we'll say maybe like an angel, guardian angel type of voice at least. He has terrible arachnophobia, and as he's about to step into this giant spider's web, he hears Jacob, stop, don't walk through those, just go around. So he walks around these two sort of columns. It's almost like a doorway. And it turns out that there was a black widow and a brown recluse spider there, both venomous spiders. If you are bit, they do have enough venom that you might indeed need medical attention. So super interesting that he didn't realize they were spiders there. He said there was like a huge infestation, but I can only imagine the trauma if he had have stepped into this giant web. He said it was almost like a movie. It was so picture perfect, with two big spiders right in the middle. So what do you make of this sort of unexplained voice warning him, sort of saving him that night from stepping into his greatest fear?
So I think a couple things jump out to me when it comes to, this story. And when you hear things like this, you have to kind of have a scientific mindset, because, one thing, at least for me, that I know, when I park my car outside, I'll wake up the next morning and I'll see a massive spider web from my car to the basketball pole, right? And, spiders can do this within an hour. So they can literally create these giant spider webs within an hour. That's all the time it takes. And after they create it, they sit in the center to hopefully lure or catch, some prey, right?
Yeah.
So, in that sense, I don't think it's unusual. I think it's actually normal to wake up and say, wow, like this is a crazy spider web. They must have been doing this for days, but it actually took an hour. I think they say 15 to 30 minutes to kind of build the foundation of it. So, in that regards, I think it's interesting, more of a coincidence. But then when he talks about the fact that he got to this cabin or whatever it was at, again, the 2 a.m, 3 a.m, he just kind of woke up. Could it have been somebody just kind of warning him, like, hey, like, keep your head up? Like, did they see him just kind of like, dozing off as he was walking? So do I think that a spirit had kind of warned him about the spider web? I don't think so, because I think there's just way too much, common sense around, spider webs in general. And if this guy knows the answer, I'd love to know, because I see them all the time around my house, and it's literally overnight.
Yeah, that's a lot of information about spider web building. I'm pretty impressed. And he did also share that he is schizophrenic, but he's got that sort of under control. And he said he definitely can differentiate sort of the internal voices of his mind versus an external voice. He did say this was an external voice. It was not from within, and it was not a voice of somebody that he was with at the time. And it's interesting to me just because I guess you brought up a great point about maybe the spider web wasn't even there at the time. I was thinking like, even if it didn't save him from being like killed by spiders, it definitely would have been traumatizing for him to even walk into it that night. But there is the potential that it was not even there at that time, which even maybe makes me more wondering about like, well, then what the hell was that voice? Like, what would have told him not to walk through that if there wasn't even a spider web there?
But also, there's also that possibility that maybe as a kid growing up, maybe somebody told him, hey, watch out, there may be a spider web there or something.
More of a memory type voice, you think?
Right. Exactly. So, who knows where that kind of came from, but I think, so this guy was terrified of spiders?
Oh, yes. Had terrible arachnophobia.
So, I mean, I think it's common sense to kind of, point out that, internally, there's probably a lot of things that trigger these type of thoughts, right? So if you're in woods, if you're by a cabin, or if you're in a, whatever the case may be, he's got to be thinking about this internally all the time.
Yeah, so maybe you're thinking it was his own, like, subconscious even, that was like, could be spiders, avoid it, walk around it.
Absolutely, because when I was a kid, I was terrified of dogs. And when I was in an open field, I would always think, what would I do if a dog chased me, right? Even though there was no dog, I would think about it. So
maybe his spider sense was tingling, so he was aware to not walk through any potential spider webs.
There you go.
Yeah, whether it was there or not. Yeah, that's another good point.
Yeah, I don't know. I when I heard about this one and, I kind of thought about it and, hearing the details a little bit more, I think there's just way too much science around this one just to kind of brush this one off a little bit.
Yeah, you're taking the spider side on this one.
Yeah.
And it's interesting even just that this is more, if you're going to say he did hear it and it did save him, interesting that it's more of sort of this guardian angel type protective voice rather than just a name as opposed to some of the earlier ones. But let's get a little more complicated and listen to a story from Cheyenne.
My name is Cheyenne. I live in Ohio. This incident happened whenever I was about 12. I'm almost 24 now, so it's been some time. But I can still remember it very well. My cousins and I used to go stay every weekend over at my aunt's house. She lived in an old farmhouse. It was kind of pretty creepy. And about a month after staying every weekend is whenever the first incident happened. My aunt told us that creepy things would happen all the time, but we kind of just blew it off, thought she was just kind of trying to mess with us, trying to scare us. Though we would stay up really late, telling scary stories, laughing, joking, the typical 12, 13-year-old girl things. This happened at about midnight. That's what we were doing. We were all laughing, and all of a sudden we heard this real faint music and talking coming from downstairs in the kitchen. She had made us a room up on the second floor, and it was kind of a big wide open space, so everything kind of echoed up the stairs. So whenever we first heard it, we all kind of stopped and stared at each other like, what in the world is going on? What is that sound? My cousin looked at me and said, well, maybe it's the TV, or maybe a radio got left on. But it was the type of sound that was almost like it came from an old record player, which my aunt didn't own. So we knew that it wasn't a TV. We knew it wasn't a radio. We knew it wasn't my aunt kind of messing with us because she had no way of doing that. On top of that, they went to bed at around 7 o'clock at night and got up at about 5 a.m. So they were generally pretty heavy sleepers and wouldn't try to play a prank on us that late anyways. Shortly after the music started, we were all kind of frozen. We didn't know what to do. We were still trying to figure out what it was. We could hear like a conversation, not like just one person, but multiple people. But it was like that hushed conversation that, whenever you're maybe in a different room, you can hear people talking, but you can't exactly hear what, they're saying. we went ahead and decided to go downstairs and check it out because we were freaked out, but we were curious. So the second that we hit the steps, all of it stopped. Like, it was just instantly quiet. We could kind of hear my aunt and uncle, snoring in the background at the bottom of the stairs. So the first thing we did was walked over to where their door was, and we could clearly hear both of them snoring very loudly. So we knew it wasn't them. We knew they were sleeping. So now, I don't think in my mind that I instantly thought, it was a ghost, it was something creepy, it was something paranormal. I was trying to rationalize what this was and what was making all of these sounds. And so we go into the very dark kitchen. There's no light from outside. It's the middle of the night. Out in the middle of the country, you have no lights. Her closest neighbor is about a mile away. So we know the noises aren't coming from outside. I step into the dark kitchen. Of course, I'm the bravest out of my two cousins who are terrified behind me. And just out of instinct, I just say, "Hello? Is anyone there?" And the creepiest part that still gives me cold chills to this day is I heard this Christmas carol, real faint. And the backstory to this Christmas carol was my grandmother was born on Christmas. She died whenever I was almost 2. And my aunt, one year for a birthday present, had given her this coffee mug that whenever you tipped it up to take a drink out of it, it played a Christmas carol. Like I said, I was about 12, so she died maybe 10 years before this. This coffee mug had been broken for a long time before that, but she kept it around because it was one of the last gifts that my aunt had ever given her. And the only way that you could get this thing to play was to shake it very hard. And even then, sometimes it wouldn't play at all. It wouldn't make any noise. It wasn't one of those things that was broken and would just randomly play at whatever time. This is maybe only the second time I had ever heard it. I just kind of look at it like maybe it was my grandma. Maybe she was just having a good time hanging out downstairs while we were upstairs telling scary stories. I've tried to think of so many logical explanations as to what it could be, but my brain can't come up with anything. We've discounted the fact that it wasn't my aunt and uncle. It wasn't a radio. It wasn't a TV. The fact that this broken mug decided to play at that same time is just crazy to me. I've had paranormal stuff happen, but I'm the first one to discount it and say, you know what, these are the rational explanations. But to me, I can't think of anything that it could possibly be. So you guys let me know.
So this was an interesting one because there was a lot of elements going on. But basically, she's having a little sleepover, getting spooky. It's about midnight when they start hearing music. They said it was almost like an old record player, like a phonograph or something, and a lot of chatter, almost like there was like a party or something. But they're at this isolated farmhouse. They're in the country. No neighbors or anything. The TV was not on. The radio was not on. The farmers wake up very early. So she said that there's no way they would be up late. Nobody's up playing pranks. This was not kind of like Andrea's mom blamed the siblings. Nobody's around playing pranks or anything, but they do hear suddenly these hushed conversations, this record player music. It's almost like a party's in full swing. Interesting here. I always love it because when more than one person hears it, you kind of have more proof. It's a little more valid. So the fact that everybody who was upstairs at the sleepover all heard it, they were all like, what the heck is it? They came downstairs to investigate and boom, stops instantly. Only thing they heard was the snoring of the parents. So then they're like, creeped out, of course. And then, speaking of sort of phantom voices and sounds, all of a sudden they hear a Christmas carol coming from what was grandmother's present, a broken mug. And she points out that this mug was so broken it would not just randomly play. It never went off. She maybe heard it like twice in her life. You had to almost violently like shake it to even get it to work. So it's weird that as soon as all this, the sounds of this party, the music all stop, and then all of a sudden, grandma's broken mug starts playing this Christmas carol. Is it grandma saying hello? I mean, the timing of that couldn't be better if the mug never works. You have to shake it vigorously to get it to work at all. And then in this empty kitchen after this party, they just hear it playing. Very bizarre. What do you make of it, Guy?
I think it's these type of stories that kind of, remind me a little bit more about what I kind of experienced as a kid growing up when I think of like a ghost story, if you will, right? And when more than one people hear it, I think that's kind of when you say to yourself, like, one, there's definitely something, or two, could be just people messing around. Otherwise, how else can you really explain the fact that more than one person kind of heard this, right?
Right.
When you think about like music, so I know with my experience, when I was upstairs with my brother and we heard bags, we heard keys rattle. So it's some sort of auditory cue.
Guy is referencing another incident that occurred in his childhood haunted home, which he shared on episode 20, Haunted Happenings.
I remember, I want to say I was about 5 years old. We were upstairs playing video games, and whenever my parents came home, we would hear the garage door open and hear the keys rattle on the kitchen island and hear bags rattle. So, we would always, hit pause, run downstairs, say hi, and then, come back and just, continue playing our games. And one night in particular, I remember, it was a Saturday night, and, my parents worked late, so it was just me and my brother. And we were playing our games, and we heard the door open, we heard the keys rattle on the island, we heard the bags. So my brother was like, hey, let's hit pause real quick, we'll say hi, and then, we'll come back up. And when we had gotten downstairs, there was nobody there. We definitely heard it. We both heard it. It was very real. And after that, we just kind of hung out in the driveway until my parents got home. We were really creeped out by it. We both remember hearing it distinctly, and, it was very real. So
we both heard the same thing. So, when I hear this, I kind of, I get a little creeped out. I think there's a lot to this story. I think with the mug and, all that, it kind of seems like a creepy movie, like a bad, vacation kind of thing.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, I don't know. This one's definitely a little uncomfortable for me.
Yeah, and as we said, her and the cousins, they all heard the voices, a lot of voices. They all heard the music. They all heard it stop. So that eliminates, we can't say, it was a sleepover, it was late. Maybe Cheyenne was tired. Maybe she was sort of in that half asleep, half awake phase. But it's like, no, it cancels out basically the user error of her ears when her and her cousins all heard it. And then going back to what we said earlier, sort of like the ghostivation. What's the motivation of this ghost? Well, if it was maybe the grandmother saying, hey, I'm here, I'm part of the sleepover, I'm with you, I'm kind of winking, saying hello, obviously in a scary way, but that's maybe the best way she could manifest herself at that moment. Like, it does kind of make sense if we're going to say maybe it was the grandma just trying to be like, hey, I'm around, I miss you, I'm here with you. And she did a good job of explaining, like, they're like miles away from anybody, so it's not like there was a party down the street. And then the fact that as soon as they get downstairs, it all dies. The sound, they heard it upstairs. It's not like you had touched the bottom step and now suddenly you hear nothing. So a lot of elements, a lot of voices. This is the first time we're hearing more than one voice. We're hearing music. So yeah, this one is much, much harder to sort of write off as one person mishearing a sound or half asleep. There's a lot of paranormal stuff going on. This one's a complicated one.
If more than one person hears it, there's got to be that common, root cause of what lured these people to come and kind of observe, if you will.
Yeah, dude, this one is tough to sort of find a logical explanation for the voices, the music, and even the mug.
Yeah. So let me ask you, when you hear a story like this and it's layered by so many different angles and, different aspects, is it too much for you to kind of process?
These are the ones that I love. These ones get me excited because I like when you can't go either way with it. I can't say this, you misheard it, it's one person. And I can't say, like, I wasn't there, so I can't be like, you definitely heard it. So these are the stories that keep me hooked, and that's why I do the podcast, and that's why I love it, because these ones are so, like, mind-boggling and hard to explain that I'm like, they all definitely heard something. We can agree on that. They all heard it stop at the same time. We can agree on that. And they all heard this broken mug that doesn't work from grandma. So it's like all those are facts. Multiple witnesses all heard the same thing. So what were they actually hearing? I have no explanation other than, I gotta say, it sounds like something paranormal, something out of the ordinary was happening. Was it spirits having a party? Was it grandma having a party that they had there in like the 50s and she was reliving that? And then that's why she got the mug. You know, that was like her coming back. And then once they were awake and she had their attention, she got the mug. I can only speculate. But to your question, yeah, these ones that sort of boggle my mind and are so layered are the ones I love because they're the ones that just keep the hook in me that I'm like, dude, something is going on in this world more than we know. And we got to try to explore it.
Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting. Like a mug would play a sound or a song that, you know, hasn't been played in years. You know, those kind of things
absolutely
creep me out a little bit when you think about it.
It's another thing that's hard to explain. And like she said, she's like, it didn't malfunction all the time. It was broken. You had to really shake it to even get it to work. So again, it's like, you can't just be like, well, they thought they heard voices and then the mug was broken. It would go off all the time. It's like, no, it never went off. And then to have it go off in that moment when they're all downstairs, it's like, as you said, it's almost like a perfect scene from a movie.
Yeah. So, I mean, let me ask you, have you ever publicly on the show given your stance in terms of, are you a believer? Like, does this kind of reinforce or support your, you know, belief around, you know, the paranormal, if you will?
This type of story does. I like to say I am a healthy skeptic. When we hear stories like Andrea and Matt, I'm like, oh, okay. You know, Andrea, it's like, yeah, I get it, but I think you were probably half asleep and sort of misheard things or imagined breath. You hear Matt's story and it's like, okay, some evidence there. There was no footsteps you didn't hear anybody in the leaves or the snow. Nobody was at your window. It wasn't a friend pranking you to scare you. Although also, usually when you do that, later you reveal it was you, which is part of the fun of the prank. So just to sort of go back to like if his friend creeped up to his window and was going, Matt, 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 and then ran home and got away with it, like 2 days later, his friend would go, hey, dude, that was me, because that's part of the fun.
Right.
But so that,
and
again,
the best joke on that is like, they probably won't tell Matt until like 25 years later, where it's like, dude, that was me.
Yeah, that's a hell of a prank. Listen to this episode and then call up Matt. But those ones, it's kind of like, yeah, there's some doubt, but these ones are the ones that make me definitely believe in the paranormal. And I guess if I'm sort of in the middle of the believer skeptic scale, this definitely points me more in the believer side because it's like nothing else can explain all those elements, all those people hearing it, and the timing of all these things happening at that time. If she was like, 3 weeks later, we heard the mug go off, then I'd be like, well, I don't know. But like in that moment, at that time, it's too perfect. So that's where I'm like, I believe her, and I believe something supernatural was happening in the farmhouse.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder too, you know, hearing these kind of things where, you know, it's definitely, you know, unsettling in a lot of ways, but like, from like, when we become spirits, let's say, do we just not know what time era it is? You know, like, do we just not know where we are? Like, would I go to my mug and just try to make coffee and, you know, my, you know, extended family are going to be like, what the hell is going on? You know?
So that's one theory. That's known as the stone tape theory.
Oh, you got to tell me about this.
Oh, yeah. So basically, it's like, say that the classic example is there's a car wreck on, Dead Man's Curve. And in 1942, they were in a green Buick and they smashed into a tree. And they say that because it was so horrific and whatever, these 4 people in the car died so suddenly and so quickly that their energy was trapped and almost recorded by the stones. That's the stone tape theory, like a tape recorder. Same thing with like a house. Though there was a murder in this house, they say that your spirit, your energy is then stuck or recorded and just on a loop playing back, which is why they'll say like every Friday the 13th of October, you can go to that corner and see that car, you know, speed by. Or they'll say, there's a woman in a Victorian dress who still walks up and down the balcony waiting for her husband to come home, you know? It's that theory that, like you said, it's maybe the grandmother is unaware. Her spirit is still thinking she's there. She's in present day. And the other theory is almost more of like time travel, where it's like, well, maybe she is still there doing things and it's almost like a glimpse like an overlap of the past and the present. So it's like she's not really a ghost. She's more of almost like not through a portal, but you're sort of getting a glimpse into the past, which is, when people say, like, I saw a man in a Civil War uniform ride his horse past me. Some people will say, like, well, you sort of, there was a moment in time where the multiverse sort of like layered upon itself, and maybe he saw you and you saw him, and you both were like, well, maybe that was a ghost because we don't know what else to call it. There's a lot of people too that claim to see shadow people or shadow figures, which they also, Stephen Hawking had a theory that could be like alternate timelines and stuff sort of overlapping. So there's a lot of sort of quantum physics, quantum mechanics that go into this that, again, makes me think more towards the paranormal side, because anytime too, so many people, like the fact that the term phantom voices exist, and we've already heard a handful of stories from people, and we have some other even wilder ones coming. It's like all these people that don't know each other are claiming to hear the same thing. We've done episodes on so many things: sleep paralysis, phantom smells, near-death experiences. It's like the more and more people that have these same experiences, I'm like, something is going on. Like, think about how many people we know that have seen ghosts. So it's like, people are seeing something, man, and they're hearing something in this case. So these types of stories definitely make me a believer.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, it's cool to know too at the same time that, there is a scientific reasoning or potential, response to explain some of these phenomena, and I think that kind of makes it a little bit more practical, because I think, now that we have like technology, so like it makes me wonder, like, if they had like a Ring camera or like a Nest or whatever the home security systems are now,
right?
Are we seeing more and more of these footages? Like, can we hear these like mug tunes being caught on camera as well? So it kind of, makes you wonder, or give you hope, I guess, a little bit more in terms of figuring out, is this stuff, really out there?
Yeah, getting some actual really solid proof. It is annoying to me that in a day and age where, right, everybody has cameras everywhere, and like you can do 4K HD video on your phone whenever there is like a viral Bigfoot video or ghost video. It's always like the worst angle, the grainiest possible footage. I'm always like, how has nobody, to your point, with all these cameras everywhere, just gotten like an amazing, great quality video that it's like, boom, here's the proof,
Yeah.
Maybe one day soon. We're definitely living in the time that, there's kind of surveillance everywhere. People have cameras on them all the time now, video cameras on them and on their phones. So hopefully one day we'll get some really good, hard to debunk proof of something. Let's keep on rocking and rolling with our next
let's do it.
story, which comes from Chris.
My name is Chris. I'm 36 years old. I live in Missouri, and this is my story. When I was 27, I'd been promoted at work, and this promotion came with relocation. I was relocated from one end of Missouri to the other side. My wife and I, we had purchased a home that was around 100 years old, and the first night that we were there, I'd stepped out on the porch to smoke a cigarette. Well, while I was out on the porch smoking, I'd heard a voice that said,
"Hello, neighbor."
Real friendly voice. But I looked around and I didn't see anybody. And I glanced at the houses around. Nobody was on their porch. No one in the street or sidewalk. And one thing to remember is this was an old neighborhood. The houses were very close together. Very close. Well, looking around, I didn't see anybody. Who knows, maybe it had just been a long day from moving. It was fairly late at night, so I was pretty tired. Could have just been my imagination. There was another night a couple weeks later where, again, it was late at night, went out onto the porch for a smoke, and as I went back inside, I was walking up the stairs to my ex-wife and I's bedroom, and I hear a voice say, "Leave." Again, I was tired, it was late, I'd been working a lot of long hours, there's a lot of stress with the move, still a lot of work to do around the house. So it's possible that just I was exhausted and I heard that voice say leave when it really could have been a squeaky step or something. I'm not sure. About a month or so later, our son, who was, getting ready to turn 3, began running down the stairs and just screaming to high hell, just screaming about a man in his room.
There's a man in my room! There's a man in my room! There's a man in my room!
We'd always go up, check his room, and everything would be normal. So we just figured, okay, maybe it's just an overactive imagination taking hold of a kid who just moved into a new house, and I don't know. A little while later, we had another child. So about 3 months after we moved, we had another son, and about 9 o'clock one morning, my ex-wife woke me up saying that she had seen a person walk into our oldest son's room. Now, of course, I went and I checked. Everything was normal. He was still laying in bed sleeping, and there was nobody else there. So I'm talking to her about it, and she describes it as kind of just a black shadowy mass. And figure, okay, well, I've been working long hours. We have a new kid. We still have another small kid in the house. So sleep was kind of something that you didn't get a lot of. So maybe it was just being half asleep that she thought she saw something. And it was around this time that our oldest son, who's now 3, started to really get into cartoons. And one of these cartoons gave him his first taste, I guess, of what you would call the paranormal on television. And that would be Scooby-Doo.
Scooby-Dooby-Doo, where are you? We got some work to do now.
Now, instead of running down the stairs screaming about a man in his room, he'd run down the stairs screaming ghost.
Ghost! There's a ghost in my room. Daddy, I just saw the ghost in my room.
And one day we were talking about it, and I had asked him if he'd ever talked to the ghost, and he said that he did. I asked him if he knew what the ghost's name was, and he told me that it was Horse.
Horse. His name is Horse.
Yeah, the ghost was named Horse. You're probably thinking the same thing that I thought at the time, that just little kids' overactive imagination because nobody is named Horse. Well, I kind of blew it off. Didn't really think much of it. A little while later, I was working one night, and I got a phone call from my wife. She told me that the window at the top of our stairs had been broken. She had been in the kitchen making dinner. Our youngest son was sleeping. Our oldest son, he was in the playroom, which was off of the kitchen. And our dog and our cat were in there as well. Well, the window that broke was at the top of our stairs. So everyone was accounted for. This window's busted all of a sudden. And like I mentioned earlier, the houses were really close together. It was aligned to where each of the houses were north and south, with the wind being unable to really get in between them. And the way the house was lined out, there wasn't really a way for a breeze or anything to hit that window at all. But I get home that night and I look at the window, and this was the old style glass where it just fragments and doesn't really shatter. Well, so there's all these fragments that are just pushed in towards the outside. So whatever broke that window appeared to break it from the inside of the house. Later that night, I got onto the internet and I was doing some research on Google because everything had been kind of building up, so we decided to look into the history of the house. So after doing some Google searching there for a while, found out that the people who owned the house during World War II had a son who was a fireman in the Navy. He had seen some action in the Pacific when he was there. Don't really know too many other details about the man. I do know that he went missing in action and his body was never recovered. Things got kind of weird, though, when I found out the man's name. Horace. Yeah, kind of sent a shiver down my spine. Anyway, we found out that Horace had a sister who lived in town, and she had passed away about the same time that everything began to kind of ramp up in our house. I don't know if it's maybe sibling rivalry carrying over to the afterlife, but I hope not, because I have 4 sisters, so that would kind of suck. Anyways, my ex-wife and I, we had been making improvements around the house. We'd been fixing cracks in the plaster, installing new light fixtures, painting, doing all that sorts of stuff. And as we were doing that, the activity in the house began to die off pretty quickly. No pun intended there. So perhaps it was Horace and his sister saw that we were there and we were going to take care of the place, and they decided they were okay with us living there. As for if I've ever doubted any of the experience that I have there, yeah, I have to admit I did. Like I say, it was an old neighborhood, it was an old house. For all I know, there could have been some faulty wiring throwing off some crazy electromagnetic energy or something. I don't know. I've heard that stuff can explain some of the haunting phenomena. I'm not really sure. The only thing that really gets me, though, is the breaking of the window, which I wasn't home to verify everybody's spot, and my youngest son calling the ghost Horse when the dead person's name was Horace. That one kind of gets to me. Like I say, everything in the house kind of stopped as my ex-wife and I began to fix the place up. As far as if I believe in the paranormal after this experience, I'm not really sure. Like I say, just the horse and the Horace name just kind of ring a little bit too close to home, but everything else, maybe there might be another explanation for. I don't know. But when you take it all into consideration together, I'd lean more towards yes, I believe, than no, I don't. But I'm still a bit skeptical. As far as this experiencing changing my views on the paranormal or supernatural, again, I'm kind of fall into the skeptic category a bit, but I have to say anything's possible, no matter if it's improbable, I guess. But I'm not definitely 100% a believer in the paranormal. I don't know. There could be stuff going on that I just can't explain.
So, just to kind of recap, Chris moves into his new place. On the first night, he hears a friendly, "Hello, neighbor." He's not scared. It's not scary. He looks around. There's no neighbor. There's nobody there. He's like, oh, that's kind of weird, but whatever. It's late. Maybe I misheard it. A couple nights later, he hears a little more kind of threatening, "Leave." And this time, he did admit he was tired. It was late at night. Both those times. He's like, maybe I was mishearing things, whatever. And then his son, always creepy when you involve kids, his son starts claiming there's a man in his room. A few months after that, his wife, now his ex-wife, also says she saw kind of a male figure, a shadow, walk into a room upstairs. Then the classic introduction to the world of the paranormal, Scooby-Doo gets a shout out. His kid is watching Scooby-Doo and then switches his vocabulary. Instead of saying there's a man in my room, he now, thanks to Scooby-Doo and friends, says there's a ghost in my room. I'm talking to a ghost. And the ghost's name is Horse, Horse. And he's like, okay, my kid's kind of weird. No one is named Horse. He doesn't think much of it. He's watching too much Scooby-Doo. And then things sort of take a more physical turn when a window sort of explodes, shatters, breaks apart randomly. No one was guilty at home. He says it appears it broke from the inside out. So it's not like somebody out, neighborhood kid hit a baseball through it or anything. They couldn't really explain what happened. Then he's kind of doing some digging. Chris is looking into things and just sort of finds out that a former resident of the house is named Horace, 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 very similar to horse. So what are your thoughts on that, guy?
I think anytime you involve a kid, it's either going to really, reinforce and support the story, or take it to, a new extreme where it's a little too much,
Yeah.
I think, when you move into a new place, there's always that possibility that you have those neighbors that are just kind of messing with you, right? Like, hey, leave, or you suck, So I think, that maybe could have been just kind of neighbors just passing by, just kind of, having fun, messing around with them. Seeing any sort of figure or a shadow of a person walking, I think that kind of thing really creeps me out. And whenever I hear that, it's hard for me to kind of, debunk or kind of think about like, what could that have been? So that stuff definitely, when you have windows suddenly break, I think it's very, it's hard to believe that can happen. You have a kid, so there's always that possibility. Was it a kid just playing with his toys and, maybe he did it by accident? And of course, who's going to want to admit to that, right? So I think there's a lot of things going on in this one. I think anytime I hear a shadow of an outline, especially for me personally, kind of, experiencing something similar to that, that stuff I have a really hard time trying to, explain. So that stuff always, sits, not well for me. But I think some of the other things, I don't know. I think it's common just to kind of put two and two together for that.
What's interesting to me, like you said, at first, Chris hears, hello, neighbor, nice and friendly. Then he hears, leave, which makes me wonder, like, it's weird that, again, ghostivation. Why would the ghost be like, oh, hey there, neighbor? And then suddenly wanted to leave, unless it was a neighbor. I like how you said neighbor saying, you suck. I don't know if that happens a lot in your neighborhood. And then we did mention like shadow figures. What I find intriguing is that it starts out where, so Chris has heard two phantom voices that he can't explain the source of them. Then his ex-wife sees the shadow figure. His son is seeing a ghost in his room. So suddenly now the whole family is taking part. And then the window breaks and nobody can explain how that happened. And what blew my mind is the kid saying he's talking to a ghost of a man named Horse. And then they find out that Horace used to live there. He was kind of had some military service and passed away. And there's no way that I could think of that the kid would know the name Horace. It's like so close. That's what, the shadow figure is creepy. The fact that everybody in the family has their own little experience is creepy. But Horace, being so close to Horace, that's what really freaks me out. And like the kid didn't research it or talk to neighbors to find out the name of the man or the ghost he might have been talking to.
So I think, with that though, like if you were Horace, let's say, and you wanted this person to understand your name and he's not saying it right, wouldn't you correct him? Right?
I mean,
so
if it's
I think with that,
it's a
just
little
kind
kid.
of a strange, right. Maybe it's a coincidence, I think. Because if you're saying, horse and Horace, sure, it does sound similar, but again, if this kid were to hear the name, in any sort of setting, Horace, I think would definitely be pretty clear cut, no?
And I think it's also interesting because a lot of people believe that kids are maybe a little more open. They're not as jaded or, I guess jaded is the right word. They're just, it seems to be something where young kids especially, seeing ghosts, communicating with them. And
right.
I don't know if he's been talking to this man, this ghost, and maybe Horace was just like his friend. It was saying, welcome to the house, whatever. Although I guess he does seem angry if he's breaking windows and stuff. But I just think that
because he said his name wrong, maybe, right? So
that's what it was. Maybe he just pissed him off with his mispronunciation. But it's just, I don't know. I just think it's so close between Horace and Horace that when he says, like, the guy's name was Horace, I was like, oh, damn. That kind of hit me in the, like, how could what are the chances that the kid named, if it's an imaginary friend or whatever, Horse, and the guy that used to live there was Horace? It's, like, so close to me. On this side, I lean more towards believer because I just don't know what the odds are that the kid could be that close to. And Horace is sort of a odd name. It's not like John or Mike. Horace and Horse.
There's also that possibility because that Horace lived there prior, right?
Correct. He did, yeah.
So could he have seen something, or could they have the kid heard their parents say something like, oh, we found a letter to Horace. That's weird. Who's this guy? So there's always that possibility, right? Was there something left behind for the kid to hear that name as well?
It sounded like Chris found out after the kid was saying Horse. He did admit that they did some renovations, they fixed stuff up, and that usually will sort of drum up a spirit. Because usually when they get angry if you're modifying or changing the house and stuff. But he says that once they sort of did renovations and stuff, everything stopped, which is kind of the reverse. Usually it's you go in, you live there, everything's cool, then you start doing additions, changing things, ripping things out, and that kind of angers the former resident spirits. But in this case, it seemed to stop everything. But, I mean, hey, man, I think on this one we fall on opposite sides of the fence just because I'm kind of impressed that horse and horse are close together. You don't seem that impressed by it, and that's all good. That's part of the show. That's how it goes.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So let's move on to another story with a lot happening and a super creepy vibe.
All right.
And this story all the way from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, courtesy of Manuel.
Yeah, so we just start with the basics. If you want to kind of just tell us how old you were, where you were, and then kind of break down your story.
Yeah, sure. So it was, I'm going to say mid to early 90s. So mid-early 90s. I was about 13, 14 at the time. My parents, they worked night cleaning at restaurants, right? What they used to do was they sometimes would take myself, or my brother along just to help out, whatever, especially during the summer months, right?
Sure.
And my uncle, the one that actually most of the stuff happened to him, he used to actually help out, kind of earn his keep that way. And he used to bring his girlfriend along as well, just for, keeping him company.
Cool.
This is what happened. So it was, I'm going to say it was in July. It was in July because we would finish school. Right? My parents had actually taken us there for the night. This must have been around 3:30 in the morning. Right. What ended up happening is my uncle's girlfriend and I, right, we used to just sit around and just, play cards or whatever, and we both ended up falling asleep on restaurant booth.
Yep.
Okay. Anyway, so we both kind of just fell asleep there, and it was around that time, right, that we got woken up together, right, by my uncle, or my uncle, in quotation marks. And as we, and he's like, hey guys, hurry up, come on, I need your help with something, hurry up, come. And we're like, what are you talking about, what's going on? He's like, just come on, let's go. Hurry up, and we're like, okay. We both kind of stand up, right? And I'm like, hang on, let me just get some stuff from the table, right?
Mm-hmm.
I go back, and then we just see my uncle. He's just like walking forward fastly, like trucking it towards a space, right? And then we just keep hearing him say, come on, hurry up, right?
Hurry up.
So we're like, okay, we're coming.
Hurry.
And as we're walking there, right? I mean, we just got interrupted, right? Like, we ended up seeing my father and stuff. And he told us, like, hey, where are you guys going? And we told him, like, oh, we're following my uncle, right, into this one section. He's like, well, no, he's like, we actually heard, he's like, your uncle went out back to get something, right, to get something to pry open that door. Like, why? Because that door is locked. And he's like, we heard that you and her were stuck down there.
Weird.
Right, so that's exactly it. So my father's telling us this, and then he's like, how the hell did you guys even get out of there? He goes, the door's locked. And we're like, we were never there. We're following my uncle here, right? He's telling us to hurry up to go down there, right?
Right.
We're like, what the hell? Right, so this thing's through there, and then my uncle pretty much showed up at that point, right? He's like, okay, and then he's looking at us like, how the hell did you guys get out? What are you guys talking about? We're like, and his girlfriend and I were like, what the hell are you talking about, right? Like you told us to follow you. He's like, no, I've been outside of the car. Like, he came in with like a tire iron.
Yeah, like a crowbar
came in
or
with
something.
a tire iron, right, to break the lock. One of the things that it's kind of like, it was a cellar. It's a cellar where they keep the wines, where they keep like really old wines. Like, I don't know if you know the kegs, like has fancy wines, fancy drinks and stuff.
Yeah.
So they had it locked. Then after that, what ended up happening is we're all together in that one area, like pretty much like, maybe about 20 feet from that door, right? And that's when my mother, who was working at the other end of the dining room, she comes in and she's looking for my daughter. She goes, hey, there you are. She goes, hurry up, we gotta get someone out of that door, right? And we're all looking at her like, what are you referring to, right? And that's where my mother says, she's like, well, I walked by the door, right, just about 5 minutes ago, and I heard, someone asking to, knocking someone to get out, to help him get out of the door.
Wow, creepy.
And it wasn't no one she recognized. She just said it was just someone, like, yelling, like, get out, like, get me out.
That's crazy.
That's just one of the weird stories that happened there.
You're 100% positive that you were. It's not like you fell asleep and like dreamt all this. Like you were awake.
No.
Everybody else was awake. This happened.
Yeah, this was 100%. Like, I would say if it was just that I fell asleep, that maybe, yeah, right? But I mean, it was my uncle's girlfriend,
right?
That I was walking with, right? And then it was my mother, and then it was my father and my uncle. So all five of us were there. And I mean, we all drove home, and, we all drove home kind of like with like this look on our face, like, okay, who's going to talk about it? Like, what the hell just happened?
Right. And, do you happen to know anything about like the history of that building, the restaurant, maybe it sounds like whatever it was kind of in the basement.
Yeah.
Do you know, is there any urban legends or anything you know about what might have been going on?
You know what? Because I talked to my mother about this and my father about this, just a couple of weeks ago. They said that before they took on the job, right? The cleaners before them quit because they said that they were scared to work there at night.
Oh.
And they thought they was just the way that the contractor told them, he's like, oh, they're probably just scared of the area, right?
Right.
But now they can see what they meant, right?
So just to recap, this was a Skype interview I had done with Manuel several years back, was just kind of waiting to break it out, and this was the perfect topic. So basically, his family does night crew cleanup custodial work at restaurants. So as a kid, he tags along, as well as his uncle's girlfriend. His mom, dad, and uncle are cleaning out this restaurant. And he does admit that him and his uncle's girlfriend were sort of sitting in a booth, just kind of waiting, fell asleep. And again, it's late at night, early morning. It's like 3 a.m. when they both wake up. And again, he confirmed he was awake. He was not dreaming. They both wake up. They both heard his uncle. They even saw him. And he's telling them, let's go, hurry up, hurry up. He's really rushing them. Come on, we got to go. And he's leading them downstairs. So they get up. They're kind of like, what's going on? Why are we rushing? As they're heading downstairs, they bump into Manuel's father. And he's confused. And he's like, what are you doing here? I thought you were in the basement. How'd you get out? And they're confused because they're like, well, what? We were over here. And then, the uncle was telling us to go downstairs. And the father is like, no, me and your uncle heard you guys yelling for help. Like, you guys were downstairs. We were trying to help you out. His uncle comes over with like a crowbar or a tire iron or something to jimmy open the door. So there's mass confusion. Nobody knows what's going on. They're all hearing each other's voices. And that's when the mom comes over and she's like, hey, there's somebody stuck in the basement. So kind of a cluster here where everyone is hearing different voices. Manuel and the girlfriend both heard the uncle. They kind of saw him running towards the basement. They followed him. The father and the uncle heard the girlfriend and Manuel in the basement. And then the mom, she did not say if it was somebody of the family, somebody present, but she did say she heard a voice of somebody saying they needed help in the basement. So something we can assume is sort of mimicking their voices. It's not just unknown voices, and everybody was hearing these voices. So what the hell do you make of this one?
Yeah, I think, this one definitely, it's hard to swallow, right? I think the fact that there was so much going on and it kind of ties down to a common similarity of everybody hearing something.
Yeah.
And that causing that confusion. And the fact that, everybody heard something different, which kind of brought them together at the end. It's a little creepy. I'm not going to lie.
Super creepy. And that's a great point too. It's not everybody was, groups of people, I guess, were sort of hearing different things. So it's not like Cheyenne, they all heard the mug. They all heard a Christmas carol. In this one, we have two people heard the other two people. They heard the other two people. The mom heard somebody else. And they're all, what creeps me out is it's basically all coming from that basement, that kind of wine cellar where the door is locked. So there's I guess we could say maybe somebody was really locked in the basement, but the fact that they were hearing multiple voices and they, your girlfriend's voice, your uncle's voice, your son's voice. So it's just super weird. To me, it's like, again, almost like a horror movie where part of me almost kind of wishes they did go in the basement because it's like, whatever, like, I want to know what evil thing was down there that was trying to sort of lure them into the basement.
Yeah, and I think, the other part to that too is that nobody can kind of vouch for somebody else. Like, oh, we both heard this, So I think that just kind of creates the fact that there was something, and the fact that everybody heard something different just kind of, definitely adds that unsettling element to it.
Yeah, 1,000%. I think this is definitely the creepiest of the stories. It's just super weird. A little tidbit that's interesting too is that the former night crew, the reason that Manuel's family got the job is because the former night crew quit, and all they said was they were like too scared to work there.
Wow.
Yeah, definitely something odd happening. Again, I almost wish, just for the sake of the story, I obviously don't want harm upon Manuel or his family, but like, I wish we kind of knew what it definitely sounds like. Some sort of evil creature, entity, something was in that wine cellar, that basement, just trying to get them to come down. And something about like mimicking the voices, it almost is very similar to the story you did not hear it, but you witnessed it, and we shared of your brother's friend heard your brother's voice in the basement and was convinced that he heard your brother's voice. So it's like one of those things where it's not just a voice, which is where I would say like, maybe, what do we know? Maybe a dude owed the manager money and he like locked him in the wine cellar for the night or something. But it wasn't continuous. If it was a real person, they would have said, hey, somebody up there, let me, they wouldn't have been quiet suddenly. And the fact that like they're all hearing each other's voices makes it 10 times scarier than if it was just like a voice.
Yeah.
It's just so something about the personal touch of it being like your loved one who you're hearing is just so like invasive and creepy and like manipulative that's why I think it just feels like this evil, dark presence. And again, like we've talked almost every story, like what's the motivation of the ghost, of the spirit, of whatever? Like what was it trying to get by luring them down into that basement? We may never know. It's a great horror movie.
This one's definitely not sitting well with me.
Yeah. As always, as we sort of kind of start to wrap up, I want to thank everybody for sharing their stories. They're all great examples of the different types of phantom voices you could hear. Which story would you say, Guy, resonated with you the most or maybe creeped you out the most?
I think definitely the one with Manuel. I think when you have a lot of things going on and you can't really put your fingers on it, it's hard to explain. There's a lot of confusion, and it's more than one person involved hearing the same thing. So I think that one definitely stands out to me and makes me kind of want to hear more stories like that. So.
Absolutely. And then just kind of looking into this, we always like to do a balanced point of view. So from the skeptical side, a lot of people who don't believe in phantom voices, they bring up the point that simply spirits, ghosts have no vocal cords. So they cannot speak. They don't have a physical form. They don't pee. They don't poop. They don't bleed. They don't speak. They also like to point out it's a common explanation is usually what it is. It's a misheard sound. It's wind. It's a squeaky door. It's late at night, which a lot of these stories were all late at night. And some of them we even said it could have been, if it's a one-syllable word, a name, it could have been something else. So the brain does something called matrixing, which is basically making sense of an image pattern. So visually, it's a fancy way to say that your brain is telling your eyes what to see. Common example occurs when you see a face in shapes, or shadows, or a collection of objects, or reflections, or patterned surfaces. So your brain is making what you see into something more common. You ever look at an outlet plug and think it's a face with two eyes and a mouth that's open? That's matrixing. There's also sound or audio matrixing. Same principle. Your brain is taking white noise, all the crap that you're hearing, and it's making it into patterns, voices, music, something more recognizable, more familiar to you. In this case, that's how they would explain you hearing voices, hearing your name. So a lot of people would say that phantom voices, EVPs, are just sound matrixing. But on the flip side to that, we did an episode on phantom smells. So if ghosts don't have bodies, they shouldn't be able to produce smells. It's very easy to say ghosts don't have vocal cords, but, there's stories of ghosts moving things, knocking things over, appearing physically manifesting. So why couldn't they perhaps make sound, speak, mimic a voice? I mean, people see them, people smell them. So why can't they hear them, you know? I think it's also very common for people to say they heard a scratch, a knock, they heard footsteps, and people will say like, oh yeah, that could definitely be a ghost. So is it that big of a stretch to say like, oh, I heard a ghost's voice? Like to me, it's like if you believe a ghost is scratching on your walls, or Chrissy said footsteps going up the walls, if they can create sounds, why can't they create a voice?
Yeah. And I think, from my personal experience, the story with my brother's friend, like he heard something. It wasn't like it's like a shh or whatever. He heard, I'm down here. So, it's I wish I could explain it. I wish I could, hear it too. But, there's a lot of things you just talked about that could explain a lot. And I don't know. How do we know for sure what it is?
Yeah, we may never know. I think we're definitely in agreement, at least, that you can explain away a lot of the simpler sounds like names, but when it's full sentences, when it's multiple people hearing multiple things, when it's more complicated sounds, or when maybe a name matches a person, so it's sort of knowledge you wouldn't have, when there's voices being mimicked and you have like 6 people all hearing it, that's when you can't say, well, it's your brain making a voice out of a sound and it's sound matrixing, and you're trying to figure things out. At that point, at that level, as you said, we can't really explain it, and we may never be able to.
Yeah, no, I'll keep listening to the show, and hopefully we'll have some form of closure in the future, huh?
Definitely. Well, thank you for lending your voice to this episode on Phantom Voices Guy. You were a fantastic co-host, and we want to thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, man. This is a blast. Really appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Clips from this episode include the CBS show Unsolved Mysteries, Season 10, Episode 1. That was the clip of Michael Landon's daughter, Cheryl Landon. The clip of Tyler Beddos was from the daytime talk show Steve Harvey. Produced by NBC Universal Television Distribution. Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Is of course the theme song to the television series Scooby-Doo. Royalty-free music heard in this episode comes from bensound.com and purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. Additional voices for this episode were from Sean Hyland, Amanda Parvis, Benjamin A. Wilhelm, Nick Dobrowolski, and Chris Marabito. Our theme song is by The Never Grin. If you have not yet rated and reviewed this show, we ask you to please do that. And as always, a big Mysterium thank you for listening to us.